Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Loving obeisances unto the Supreme Being Vasudeva, who is everything there is. Janmadyasya yato anvayadi taratascha artheshu abhigyaswarat tene brahmahridaya adi kavaye muhyanti yat surayah tejo vari mridam yatha vinimayo yatra trisargo mrisha dhamna svena sada nirastakuhakam satyam param dhimahi. We meditate upon the Supreme Being from whom springs forth this universe. He is present in all that exists and yet distinct from everything. He is fully conscious and totally independent. He revealed to the first seer Brahma the import of Vedic wisdom. The material creation of three gunas appears in him as though real, like water in a mirage. Being eternally self effulgent, he is ever free of the illusion Maya of the material world. We meditate on him, the Supreme Being. Nigama kalpataror galitam palam shukamukadamrita drava sanyutam pibata bhagavatam rasamalayam muhuraho rasika bhuvi bhavukaha. O devotees who relish a taste for divine love, Bhagavatam is the fully ripened fruit of the wish-yielding tree of Vedas, flowing as immortal nectar from Shuka Brahma Rishi. Go on drinking this nectar day after day. So now we are entering the 5th chapter of the 3rd Skandha of Bhagavatam. As we saw, Vidura met with Uddhava, and after hearing Uddhava's recounting of all the pastimes of Krishna and his departure, and as Uddhava had instructed, Vidura goes to the banks of Ganga to meet with sage Maitreya, because he was specifically instructed by Krishna to get the instructions from Maitreya for the questions he has. So being enormously gratified, pleased, and overwhelmed that Krishna specifically remembered Vidura and told Maitreya to instruct him. Knowing this, Vidura very joyfully went from Yamuna to Ganga, to the banks of Ganga at Haridwar. And it says that as he approached Haridwar, he met with this great sage Maitreya, who is of great wisdom, and Vidura is of great devotion. His heart was so purified by devotion. It says he is Achyuta Bhava Shuddha. Achyuta is a name for Krishna, the infallible Lord, and his bhava, his heart is purified by devotion to Achyuta, to Krishna. And such a pure being, Vidura, goes to meet sage Maitreya and sees him, and very happy to meet him there, right on the banks of Ganga. And he asks him a question right away. He says, "Hey, great sage, people perform various actions for the sake of happiness, and yet nobody seems to be happy. In fact, they seem to be only undergoing suffering again and again. So, what is advisable to be done as the right course of action by people?" So, Vidura, right away, we can see here the sublime nature of conversations and dialogues in Bhagavatam. Vidura's question to Maitreya is not for his welfare, even, is not for his spiritual realization, but for the welfare of all beings. He is full of compassion, being a pure devotee, and he sees this state of affairs in the world, which is true then 5,000 years ago and is true now, that people are engaged in so many activities looking for fruits of happiness, but they never get it. Instead, they only multiply suffering. And therefore, while their goal is proper, to realize happiness is the natural constitutional position of the soul, because we are of the essence of the Supreme Being, and therefore of the essence of Ananda, bliss. But looking for it outwardly in worldly objects and worldly relationships, in activities, is where we are looking, and therefore looking in the wrong place. And that's what Vidura points out and says they are looking for happiness, But all the actions they do only multiply their suffering. So, what is to be done by them correctly? Because all the devotees of the Supreme Lord Krishna, Janardana is the word he uses here. Janardana is another beautiful name of Krishna, which means he who ends the cycle of birth and death. So, Janardana, the devotees of Janardana, move in this world only to shower their grace. And therefore, he is saying to Maitreya, you also shower your grace by pointing out what is the right course of action for all those people who, through some bad luck, have turned their face away from Krishna, turned their face away from truth itself, and are therefore extremely miserable. So be pleased to point out to me the right path by which people can truly realize the truth, truly have the presence of the Supreme Being in their heart felt, to have their heart purified by devotion, and thereby get the most ancient wisdom, he says. Because the wisdom of the self, the wisdom of the Supreme Being, is not something new to be acquired. It is the most ancient wisdom because it is ever present, but it is also fresh. That is why Krishna is also referred to as Purana Purusham Nava Yavvanam Cha. He is the most ancient being and yet eternally youthful. So, the meaning of that is Krishna is always ever present in the heart, and therefore he is eternally there as the most ancient truth, and yet every moment is fresh because it doesn't carry any memory of the past. Awareness of the heart as Paramatma is fresh every moment, and therefore he is both the most ancient wisdom and the most fresh, youthful wisdom. And that's what Vidura says here, that if the hearts of men are purified by devotion, then they can realize this most ancient wisdom. Then he also says, please tell me about the various deeds performed by the Lord. Because the other aspect of Bhagavatam, which always is repeated in every dialogue, is that the most direct and easy way to purify the heart is not through some abstract contemplation, but through directly listening to and glorifying the activities, the names and activities of the Supreme Being. So that's why in the Bhagavad Gita 2, Krishna says, simply knowing my divine birth and activities will ensure that the one who knows so will reach me, because it removes one's bondage in what is called Mahamaya and brings him into the realm of Yoga Maya, which is the divine potency of the Lord, which is grace itself. And by connecting to grace directly through listening to the names and chanting the names and glories of the Lord, naturally the attachment to worldly ties, which is the effect of Mahamaya, goes away, and the divine potency of grace, Yogamaya, naturally gives jnana and vairagya, wisdom and detachment. So, this is the essence of Bhagavatam itself, both the truth and the way to realize the truth. The truth is He is ever present as the original Supreme Being, and the way to realize it is by directly surrendering unto Him as the only truth there is, and by listening to His names and to His glories of His various exploits, which purifies the heart in the most effortless way, and thereby realizing the truth in the heart. So that's why Vidura asks, please tell us about the various deeds performed by the Lord as well that can purify the hearts of men. Also, please tell us the mystery of creation. So, this question that was asked by Parikshit to Shuka, asked by Narada to Brahma, and now it's asked by Vidura to Maitreya, because this is the same wisdom that Krishna himself gave to Brahma, at the beginning of creation, and then he gave to Uddhava, as we saw in the last chapter, briefly. It was not detailed, but it was the essence of what was taught to Brahma. And now the same was listened to by Maitreya in the presence of the instruction from Krishna to Uddhava, as we saw. So Maitreya is well aware of it, and Krishna knows that Vidura has the same question, and therefore he had told that Vidura can listen to Maitreya, and that's why Vidura exactly asks that very question about the mystery of creation, how he created this multifarious universe, how he sustains it, and how he dissolves it. And also recount all the exploits he performs within this Maya. As we say, he not only transforms into this universe through his own Maya, but he enters this Maya to perform various exploits as various avatars. So he again reminds Maitreya to talk about the various avatars, because he says, my mind does not ever feel satisfied by hearing the nectar like stories of Krishna. It never says enough, because this is the sign of a pure devotee like Vidura, that he is only interested in talking and discussing about the stories of Krishna, and he has naturally lost any attachment for worldly affairs. In fact, if we notice here, the great Mahabharata war has ended. The greatest news of that time, we can say, it is the greatest calamity that happened. Millions of people got killed, and Vidura was away doing his pilgrimage, and he got to know that all these events have happened. And Yudhishthira has now been made the king, and all his other nephews have all died, and millions of armies have been killed, and all the rest. And Vidura is not interested in knowing any more detail about any of that. All he wants to know is about the activities of Krishna, about the nature of truth. So, this is the sign of a pure devotee who is not interested in any worldly affairs, even though the world was at the time filled with so many exciting events, which are even recounted today as the story of Mahabharata. But Vidura was not interested in that. He was only interested in knowing about Krishna. So he says, please tell me about all the various duties that are entrusted to different people by effortlessly by the Supreme Being Narayana. So, because what Vidura notices is the diversity of creation itself. He sees people, everyone is unique. Every created being, even among human beings, we see that, and among even up to a blade of grass, every created entity is unique. It is not like coming from a lab where everything is the same. Here in nature, up to the blade of grass we see on a lawn, no two blades of grass are alike, and no two humans are alike. Everyone is unique with a distinctive disposition, form, name, activity, everything. Even two twins growing up in the same house are never exactly the same. They have so many distinct qualities. So, this uniqueness is what Vidura refers to and says, how does the Lord create this entirely diverse and variegated universe with so many distinct created beings? So, please tell about this, O great sage Maitreya. Then he also adds that I have heard a lot about the various dharmas of different classes of men, but now I am not interested in all that, because I am only interested in the highest dharma, which is to know about the glories of the Supreme Lord. So it's very interesting that he says that, because Vidura is known for composing Vidura Niti, which we saw in the beginning of this Skandha, where he gave Dhritarashtra the great wisdom of the right dharma for a king and for different classes of men. Vidura's exposition on dharma, Vidura Niti, is still revered as a great work on moral codes. But the same Vidura, after that, he went on this grand pilgrimage and he lost interest in even all those types of different dharmas or different classes, and he says, I am only interested in the supreme dharma. This is why Krishna also says in the Bhagavad Gita, in the end, that Sarva Dharman Parityajya Mam Ekam Sharanam Braja. He says to Arjuna, you give up all other dharmas, all other codes or prescribed duties, and you simply surrender unto me, and everything will be all right. And that's exactly what Vidura says here, that I am fed up with all the other dharmas because they are only conducive to petty results. So I only find delight in the stream of nectar that flows from hearing about Krishna. So please tell me more, because who can ever be satisfied, or say, who can ever say it is enough? When is it ever enough to listen to the stories of Krishna? Because the more we listen, the more we want to listen to it. It enters our ears and it cuts all bonds of attachment. So, this is what we talked about, that simply listening to the stories of Krishna, when we listen to, for example, any pastime of Krishna, such as, uh, for instance, him protecting the boys in Vrindavan from demons, or him doing this beautiful dance with the gopis, or him giving this beautiful advice to Arjuna, every incident that Krishna engages with the various devotees of various pastimes in Vrindavan or Mathura and Dwarka, when we listen to that, we are fully engaged, all the senses are engaged in it, and we are transported to a different world altogether. We are with the Lord, because the stories of the Lord are non different from the Lord, just as the names of the Lord are non different from the Lord. So when we listen to the stories, we are with Him, and we are therefore completely dissociated from our worldly ties, and therefore the attachment to worldly ties are cut effortlessly by listening to these stories. That's why Vidura says, please tell more and more about the stories of Krishna. In fact, he adds that even Vyasa, who's a friend of Maitreya, as we already saw, he says Vyasa wrote the entire Mahabharata only for one purpose, which was to draw people who are drawn to other political and social affairs gradually towards Sri Hari, because Mahabharata generally deals with a lot of political intrigue and war and fights and various manipulations. There are so many intricate activities described in Mahabharata, but the purpose of listening to all that is to draw them towards the supremacy of Krishna, because throughout Mahabharata, Krishna's greatness comes through in every episode, and towards the end, of course, the crown jewel of Mahabharata itself is the Bhagavad Gita, which happens during the war. So that's the only reason Vyasa wrote it. And of course, we saw Vyasa was still not satisfied, that he wrote Mahabharata with all the other events, and therefore he composed Bhagavatam, which is the crown jewel of all scriptures. So he says, Vidura adds that the attraction for the stories of Hari, it creates aversion for all other things. It puts an end to all the sorrows, because once one gets the higher taste, the taste of listening to the stories of Hari, then that automatically puts an end to all the other petty tastes and interests. Therefore, you, I only, he says, I only pity those men, ignorant men, who do not have a taste for these stories, because they are wasting their time. He says, they, every moment they engage in idle talk, idle activities, idle thought. And when it says idle, it doesn't, I mean, they may be very busy with so many activities, but it's all idle ultimately, because all talk, activities and thought about worldly concerns, about petty interests of the world, getting entertainment and all the rest, is only, Vidura says, is only cutting their time short. Time is precious, And every moment wasted in these kinds of idle activities is taking their time away, and they are marching towards death without listening to the stories of Hari. So I only pity them. Therefore, you, O great sage Maitreya, just as a bee gathers honey from flowers, you also please extract the essence of all the stories of Hari and relate them to me, and relate all the superhuman feats that have been performed by Krishna through his own energy, Maya, and begin with the first question, because he again reminds Maitreya that his first question was the mystery of creation itself, which is the same question that was asked, as we said, by Parikshit and by Narada. So he wants Maitreya to begin from the beginning by first talking about the mystery of creation and how he manifests this infinitely diverse creation of so many distinct created beings, and then how he enters into that very creation to perform all his leelas. So when he addresses Maitreya in this manner, Maitreya is mightily pleased. He says, "O Vidura, your very question is so excellent. You are so excellent. You are so auspicious." He says, "You are most auspicious. Your question is most auspicious, and it is going to bestow auspiciousness on the whole world." He says, "Sadhu prishtam tvaya sadho lokan sadhu anugrahnata." Says beautifully, "Sadhu prishtam, asked by you, the question asked by you is auspicious. Tvaya sadhu, you are auspicious, and lokan sadhu anugrahnata, in order to bestow grace, the most auspicious grace on the world itself, because these questions are eliciting responses about the Supreme Lord." And then he also glorifies Vidura by saying, "It is no wonder that you are asking these questions and you are so single pointedly devoted to the Supreme Lord, because, first of all, you are the son of Vyasa." So the point here is, Duryodhana, as we saw, abused Vidura, saying you are the son of a maid servant. But the truth is, Vidura's mother was a maid servant, indeed, but his father was Vedavyasa himself. He was born to Vedavyasa and a maid servant, and therefore he had the qualities of Vedavyasa even though he was born to an ordinary maid servant. And Duryodhana could only see that his mother was a maid servant and abuse him without seeing the greatness of Vidura. But Maitreya sees that. And of course, Krishna, that's why, out of his supreme compassion, recognizes the greatness of Vidura and specifically instructed Maitreya. And that's why he says here, Maitreya says, "You are ever beloved of the Lord. That is why, while departing from this world, the Lord commanded me to teach you this wisdom." So that's why Maitreya also recognizes that there is a reason why the Lord commanded him to teach Vidura specifically at the very instant of him departing this world, because he knows the great one-pointed devotion of Vidura, being the son of Vyasa. So therefore, Maitreya says, "I will now recount the Lord's pastimes starting from creation." And then he says beautifully the exact same thing that was related to Brahma by Bhagavan, where Bhagavan said, "I am before creation, I am alone was." Here he says the same thing in third person. He refers to Bhagavan and he says, "Before creation, the universe existed in no other form than the Lord." He says, "Bhagavan eka asa idam agra atma atmanam vibhuhu." He says, Bhagavan eka asa, Bhagavan alone existed in the beginning, before creation, and he is the self of all souls, the self of all selves, Atma Atmanam. And there was no subject and object in the beginning. There was only the pure subject, which is pure consciousness. As we chant the first verse, he is fully conscious and totally independent. So he has no object, only the pure subject, which is pure consciousness, and all his powers lay dormant. He alone existed, the Supreme Being Vasudeva, who alone is. And then the energy of the all-perceiving Lord, which is called Maya, it came forth to create this universe. And then he details the exact process that Brahma described to Narada. For, if you remember, in the second Skandha, there was a chapter where Brahma in detail gave the process by which creation came about. The exact process is again detailed by Maitreya here for the benefit of Vidura and also for all our benefit, because the good teaching happens through repetition. So it again comes in the third skandha as well. So Maitreya tells Vidura that in the beginning the Lord alone was, and then latent in him was the power of Maya, which came forth as the three gunas, and then the equilibrium of the three gunas was disturbed by time, and then also dormant in him is the latent tendencies of all the jivas from the previous cycle, and therefore he brings forth through his own maya and time, based on the latent tendencies of the various jivas, the cosmic intelligence called Mahat. And this cosmic intelligence called Mahat is the essence from which the universe is created, and it is composed of time, as we saw, the three gunas, and the jiva. The jiva is the reflected consciousness. It's called as Chidabhasa. Chid means consciousness and Abhasa is reflection. So the reflected consciousness, which is the individual entity, is created out of this Mahat. And along with the three gunas and time, this Mahat, this cosmic intelligence, then transformed itself to create the universe by first bringing forth what is called as the I thought, or ahamkara. And this I thought had three qualities, as we saw: tamas, rajas, and sattva, the three gunas. The tamasic I brought forth, this is the original I thought, which is the cosmic I thought, the first I thought that comes at the beginning of creation, the cosmic ahankara, not the individual ahankara of, or the individual ego of the various created beings, which comes later as a further reflection. But in the beginning is the original reflected ahamkara of the cosmic intelligence, because the supreme being is alone the source of consciousness. And when the cosmic intelligence, which is Mahat, develops an idea of I thought, that itself is a reflected consciousness, and that's called Chidabhasa. So this reflected consciousness of the Mahat comes forth as three gunas: tamas, rajas, and sattva. And tamas brings forth the five elements. We saw this earlier too. The five elements go from the subtle to the gross. It first brings forth space, and from space it brings forth air, and from space and air it brings forth fire, or light, fire, and from that it brings forth water, and from water finally it brings forth earth. And correspondingly the sense perceptions of hearing through space, touch through air, seeing through light or fire, tasting through water, and smelling through earth comes forth through the tamasic ego. And the rajasic ego brings forth the various senses of perception as well as the organs of action. There are the five senses of perception corresponding to these five elements which we listed, and the five organs of action, which are speaking, holding, moving, reproducing, and excreting. All these come about through the rajasic ego. And the sattvic ego brings forth mind as well as the presiding deities of all the senses. So, with this process, the Mahat Tattva, the cosmic intelligence, brings forth all the necessary ingredients for creation to happen. That is, all the elements, the five elements, and the various senses and the organs of action, that is the potencies, the ability to perceive and the ability to act, and then also the faculty of mind and ego, all the necessary ingredients for creation to come about, from the inanimate, which is only made of the elements, to the animate, which is made of the elements, the senses, and the mind, is all brought forth through this Mahat Tattva, this cosmic mind. And then it says here that the deity is presiding over this Mahat Tattva. So these various qualities or the ingredients of Mahat, which are time itself and the various elements and their presiding deities, all of them are simply rays of the Supreme Lord. So they are all, as we saw, everything is coming from the Supreme Being. Therefore, the Supreme Lord Vasudeva, the pure being that alone is as the only subject, has brought forth this Mahat with all these ingredients which came forth from the three gunas, and which includes time and all the other elements and so on. So, all of these are only manifestations or expansions of the Supreme Lord, and therefore, these expansions themselves are always glorifying the Supreme Lord. They are only functioning through the potency vested in them by the Supreme Lord, and therefore they address the Supreme Lord. Maitreya says, these devas, these deities which preside over these elements, these are the first created beings, and these devas, these deities, they address the Supreme Lord by saying, you are the only refuge, because they are not able to bring forth everything together. The creation happens only when all these ingredients come together to spring forth the universe with all the animate and inanimate beings. And so it is said here that while all the ingredients are there, they were not able to come together to manifest this universe, because that needed the Lord's energy. And therefore, they prayed to the Supreme Lord. And Maitreya recounts this beautiful prayer. He says, these devatas, these deities, pray to him and say, we bow to you, because just as an umbrella affords relief from the heat, you alone afford refuge to anyone who has any suffering. So now here we have to also note that all these devatas, when they come forth, they are also having the awareness of the previous cycle. So it is happening, as we said, multiple times comes in Bhagavatam. Creation happens cyclically. So every kalpa, this process again resumes, and then there is a dissolution, and then again there is a period of complete absorption where the Supreme Being alone is, and then comes forth the next cycle of creation. So when the next cycle comes forth, the latent tendencies of the various beings are still present in a seed form, and that's what springs forth and comes forth as the ordained sequence of events that go through the entire universe. So these devatas, with awareness of that, say that in every cycle it is seen that nobody has peace of mind unless they resort to your lotus feet. And therefore, at the very beginning, we take shelter in your lotus feet, which is the source of all creation, which is the source of the holiest of river Ganga, and which purifies through devotion by simply hearing and chanting your names. And therefore, we only want you to grace us with what is necessary to go forth with this creation, because only glorifying you brings forth true wisdom that is coupled with dispassion. It says here beautifully that the nature of the wisdom that comes with dispassion is alone true wisdom. Jnanena vairagya balena, it says. The jnana, the wisdom that has the power of dispassion. Because otherwise, simple jnana, uh, which can be intellectual knowledge or understanding, if it doesn't manifest as detachment to worldly goals and ties, and dispassion to worldly events, and interest only in the Supreme Lord, if that transformation of heart has not happened, then that knowledge is not true knowledge. And therefore, it says here that true wisdom, true jnana, is that which is strengthened by dispassion, and that comes forth only by being devoted to you, being surrendered to you, because you vouchsafe fearlessness to anyone who adores you. But then those who are falsely identified with their body and with their relations and with their possessions, considering them as I or mine, we have seen always in every cycle that they always go through only suffering. They do not recognize you even though you dwell in their very heart, and their mind is led astray. They go here and there chasing unworthy objects of the world, and therefore they do not get the privilege of beholding the elegance of your grace. So, this is the case now. This was the case then. This is the case always, that in every cycle, at any point in time, it is the same one problem that afflicts all created beings, is this attachment to I and mine. When the bodily identification, taking the body to be the self and taking the possessions, both material as well as relations and people around, and identifications with nation and religion and all the rest as mine, is what causes division and what causes suffering. And therefore, it is pointed out here that these people who have such deep rooted false identification of I and mine are the ones who go through suffering life after life, cycle after cycle, because they fail to see your grace. Therefore, on the other hand, they also point out that those whose heart has been purified through devotion by simply drinking the nectar of your stories, they easily attain the spiritual wisdom that is of the essence of dispassion. Again, it says here, Vairagya Saram Pratilabhya Bodham. Again and again, Bhagavatam emphasizes that the bodham is another word for jnana, and so the bodham, the wisdom, is of the essence of vairagya saram, that is of the essence of detachment or dispassion. That is the true essence of wisdom. So those who are devoted to you and to simply listening to you and glorifying your names and stories, they are naturally blessed with this true wisdom, which is of the essence of dispassion, as opposed to those who are caught in false identification as I and mine. And then, one more important thing that's pointed out here is that there are also those, so first it mentioned those who are purified in their heart and get the spiritual wisdom, which is of the essence of dispassion, by simply being surrendered unto you, glorifying you, and listening to your stories. But then it's also added that there are also those who conquer this Maya by concentrating their mind on the self. So, this is what is called as self abidance, and directly, completely being focused on the pure self, on the pure awareness, which is the way of jnana yoga, we can say, the yoga of concentrating the mind on the self. And it said here that even they attain you undoubtedly, but their hardship is great. So this is a very important point that Bhagavata makes, which Bhagavad Gita also makes. So normally it is said that one can realize the Supreme Being either by meditating on the self directly, or by being completely surrendered unto the Supreme Lord. But the way of surrender is very sweet because there is a beautiful loving relationship with the Lord, and thereby it is it is engaging all the senses and effortlessly creating detachment and dispassion. Whereas the way of completely concentrating the mind on the pure self is very hard. And this is exactly what Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita too. In the verse, in the 12th chapter, Arjuna asks this question. He says, there are those who adore you by being completely devoted to you, and then there are those who focus on the unmanifest pure Brahman. And which one of these are correct? And Krishna says, both reach me, those who are completely devoted to me and those who focus on the Aksharam, that is the unmanifest Supreme Being. But then he says very importantly the same thing. He says, Klesho adhikataras tesham avyakta sakta chetasam. He says, those who are focusing on the unmanifest self directly, they have great difficulty and hardship. And this is a very practical and true statement that has to be listened to with humility, because many think we can directly simply abide as the self, and that process, Krishna says very clearly in Bhagavad Gita, while it is definitely taking one to the same realization, klesha adhikatara tesham. He says those people who do that, avyakta chetasam, they are focusing only on the unmanifest. So those who are focusing only on the unmanifest self, klesho adhikataras tesham, they have great difficulties and great obstacles, because the nature of the mind and the nature of the senses is to run outward, and therefore to simply lock the mind and focus on the unmanifest is extremely arduous and very difficult for most people. And that's why Krishna says it's very difficult. Whereas those who are devoted to me and surrendered unto me, they realize the same truth much more effortlessly and easily. So that's exactly what Bhagavatam says here, that the wise men who conquer Maya by the force of concentrating their mind on the self undoubtedly realize you, but their hardship is great. Whereas there is no hardship in adoring you. This is exactly as Bhagavad Gita says, that there is no hardship in completely being surrendered unto Him. Of course, it's not easy. It requires great grace to be fully surrendered, to be not interested in anything else but listen to the glories of the names and the stories of the Lord. But the beauty of that is, the more we listen to kirtan, or the singing of the holy names, or listen to the stories and listen to such works as Bhagavatam, and the uh, connect to a relationship, a loving relationship with the Supreme Lord, the more sweeter it gets, because of the nature of this loving relationship in the heart. Whereas when one is only doing meditation without this relationship, without this loving devotion and surrender, then it becomes extremely difficult. And this is another reason why many who take to a Buddhist way of meditating find great difficulty, because again the same sense of voidness comes forth when there is only meditation without any kind of taste for surrender and love. And therefore, that's exactly what Bhagavatam says here, that there is great hardship in that process, whereas there is no hardship in adoring you and fully being surrendered unto you. So, after making this important point, all these deities addressing the Supreme Lord say that we have been created by you through the three gunas, that is our very nature, but we are all disjoint, as we said in the beginning. they are saying to the Lord that we are all disjoint, and therefore we are unable to go about the process of creation of the universe, and therefore we are seeking your grace here, because you are the immutable ancient person and the prime cause of everything, and you are the one who has placed the seed of creation in us in every way. And now you please do what is necessary, because we depend on your grace, so that your creative energy can come forth fully and this creation can take its manifest form. So, this is the prayer they address. But again, the prayer, while this is the purpose of the prayer, we can see how Bhagavatam, through these prayers, give us so much wisdom in terms of the process of realizing the truth, and the way of realizing, and the reason why people are caught in suffering through identification to I and mine, and the hardship of meditation without surrender. All of this comes through, though the purpose of the prayer is only to seek the Lord to bestow His grace for success in the work of creation. So now, with this chapter ends, and in the next chapter, we will see again the cosmic being come forth, as already we have seen in the second skandha. This whole process of creation is detailed in a few chapters now, in a different way, again to re emphasize this essential truth that all of this universe is He alone. It is Vasudeva alone that is all there is. And so this truth is repeated in so many ways to drive home that there is nobody other than Him, and to see that is to see the truth of all. So with that, this chapter ends. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.